everyone, and hello everybody watching. My name is Kay, and I'm originally from NTT Data, and I have been working with everis ever since 2014 when everis joined NTT Data. I used to say this many times now, it seems like such a long way in the past. We have been together, working together over 6 years now. So it has been a history, a very interesting history. On the course of these many years, NTT Data has been increasing its number of employees around the world. And now we have about more than 120,000 people in NTT Data around the world. And among all of these people, all of these companies that we have in NTT Data, I think everis has been one of the leaders in driving the importance of innovation in the different companies. And I think there are a lot of different initiatives that have been taking place in NTT Data companies, but they have been a reflection of what everis has been doing in the past. I think one of the very key activities of everis would be working together with everis Foundation in these kind of entrepreneurship awards, or in trying to support the community of the society in how to create more innovative ideas around the world. So being together with everis, actually I have been working in Latin America for 3 years, and now about more than 2 years in Spain. I have had the pleasure to work with so many different everis people, and a lot of people tell me that Japan is a country of many innovative technological ideas and products, but I agree. I really welcome and appreciate all these comments. But working with the everis people, I feel that it's not just about Japan, but even within everis, there's a lot of interesting people with different interesting ideas. The products or the services that everis presents to the clients is also very, very interesting. And actually, if you take a look at all these services or projects that we do around the world within the realm of NTT Data, actually NTT Data people in Japan sometimes have the opportunity to learn from everis as well. So it's not that one country or one company is better or worse, but I think you should take pride in the innovative ideas and the people that you have in everis. So we have this wonderful opportunity to see all these different wonderful ideas within everis through this award. If possible, I think it would be very interesting for a lot of people to take part and to show what they are thinking in their minds every day, and hopefully for someone to win the award and have a trip to Japan and to have a interesting discussion with the people in Japan as well. So I think to induce this kind of discussion, we have a very interesting guest speaker for us. So thank you for coming, and hope you enjoy.
Thanks. So thanks for being here. I know when you make a living of consulting, time is the principal scarce resource. So really appreciate you making time for this conversation. I've been involved with everis Foundation for a couple of years now, also in the Entrepreneurship Awards of the Foundation, and so when they invited me to just have a conversation about what social entrepreneurship is about, and what's the space for social entrepreneurship and social innovation nowadays, also in business, right? I really wanted to jump in and just have this conversation with you. So as Carla was mentioning, my main interest is technology and how we can use technology for social impact in different schemes and different models. I do believe that now, for the first time ever, we can really end poverty in the world. The means are there. And that's why I wanted to start by showing you the Sustainable Development Goals and the SDGs. I don't know how familiar you are with the 2030 Agenda. The 2030 Agenda is the child of the Millennium Development Goals, which was the previous agenda, right? There's a huge difference, in my view, from the Millennium Development Goals to the 2030 Agenda. And because the Millennium Development Goals, like both have been conceptualized at the United Nations, right? The Millennium Development Goals, the mind frame with which they were conceptualized was that of rich countries and poor countries, and there being like poor country problems that rich countries could help solve. So it was an invitation for mostly governments of the rich countries to help governments of the poorer countries achieve or implement solutions for these poor country problems, right? This is a vast simplification. It was a much more complex paradigm, and it was very successful along many variables. But I think this simplification will help you understand the change. The Sustainable Development Goals are an invitation for the entire world to solve problems that affect the entire world. It is not an invitation for some governments to do something for other governments, which again, it's probably an unfair simplification of the previous framework, but it's an invitation for every actor in society to collaborate in solving global problems. So from one framework to another, there was an understanding of a context in which problems don't belong to countries. We are in a transnational context now, where opportunities are global and problems are global as well, where rich countries have problems as related to their sustainable development, poorer countries have problems as related to their sustainable development, and the development of poorer countries is creating problems for rich countries from a sustainability perspective. So it's a much more global context. And there was, first of all, a different understanding of who owns and suffers the problems. And also, there was a clear view of the massive gap between the challenge and the capabilities of government. So there was a deep understanding and embracing of the fact that these are not problems for governments to solve, because then these are problems that will never be solved, period. Because the capacities in economic terms and in competencies of the governments are just not enough, or in many instances, they're not adequate to solve many of these problems. So in order to conceptualize the SDGs, what happened around the United Nations was that there was a massive debate involving corporations, involving banks, involving education institutions, involving governments as well, to take into account private sector, financial sector, also education, in conceptualizing what are the goals. That also explains why there's 17 of them, because when you try to get so many people to agree on something, you're probably going to end in a very long menu, right? But because it was very difficult to bring everybody together. And something else that they did was they opened up a survey for individual people to answer. So thousands of people from all around the world answered these questions. And the big question that they were trying to find an answer for is, what is the world? What is a good world? What do we human beings, can we human beings agree to a shared notion of what a desirable world is? Because if we are going to build a better world, what does that mean? What is a better world? So we, being all of the different actors in the society, agreed that a desirable world is one in which there's no poverty, there's no hunger, there's access to good health, there's gender equality, there's clean water and sanitation for everybody, where there's accessible energy, decent work, and economic growth, where we can use industry, innovation, and infrastructure and make it available for everybody, where there's no inequality, where cities are sustainable, and the way in which we behave and coexist in cities is sustainable, where consumption and production is done in a responsible way, where we're protecting our climate, we're protecting our life underwater, we are protecting life on land. There's peace and justice and strong institutions, and this is being achieved through partnerships that are meaningful. And that is a world in which companies big and small, banks big and small, universities, governments, and individuals agreed that is the world in which they would like to live in the future. The world in which they would like their children to thrive. And this co-creation has led to an invitation to the entire world then, in turn, to engage in achieving the SDGs. And that is why you're seeing a lot of conversation about the SDGs also in corporations, also in companies, because this belongs to corporations as well. This does not belong to government, and it does not belong to international organization, and it does not belong to civil society. It belongs to corporations. And many of these SDGs, if you go into what each of them means and the KPIs and so on, you can see there's a lot of them that affect companies very, very directly. Many of them have been defined by companies, by corporations, to engage. So that's one. This is like a part of the framework, of the context. The reason also why I'm excited about the framework and also the possibilities to achieve this is that now we do have the technology to make this possible. Like cool technology, the most amazing technology is not that which allows us to do better things that we could do worse in the past. Amazing technology is that allows us to do things that we could not do in the past. And we have stuff now that makes possible things that you could barely even dream of in years before. So 15 years ago, someone could tell me, there is no way we can produce affordable whatever. And now I'm like, you really need to try hard to make it expensive. You're just making it expensive by adding layers of, I was about to swear, but I won't do it on camera. Layers of useless stuff into your product. Because you can make it affordable, because you can make it accessible, because the technology exists to do it. And the intelligence and the innovation capabilities exist to do it. So you're doing it expensive because you want it expensive. And you're not doing it accessible because you're not putting enough effort into making it accessible. But not because you can't, sorry. If you think about poverty and ending poverty, just a quick show of hands in the room. Those of you that are connecting remotely, I can't see your hand. Who thinks in the room that poverty is rising right now? Poverty is rising? Who thinks that poverty is going down right now? So most people in the room, for you on camera, don't think. They don't have an opinion. So, well, this is not a class. If this was a class, I would absolutely force you to show us in one direction or the other, but I want Carla to invite me again, so I won't do that. So actually, when you ask this conversation around the world, there's a very interesting study that shows that most people in the world believe that poverty is rising. Some people believe it's stagnated, and few people believe it's going down. When you take that by region, it switches. In poorer countries, most people believe poverty is going down. Some people believe it's stagnated, and few people believe it's going up. And they are right. Poverty is going down massively. When you see the graphs, when you see the curves, since the Industrial Revolution to now, millions of people have gone out of extreme poverty. Millions. In Asia, it's amazing. Like, Asia is a miracle. Yes?
Isn't it then time to reanalyze what the poverty line is? Because
Yes.
I think that when people say that poverty is increasing, the distance between the people that are empowered and the people that don't have anything. In the past, it was the poverty line where you had to have a roof over your head and clean water, but nowadays we are less and less focused on maybe it's not roof over your head and water, but maybe it's other things that we should include in what is considered the poverty line.
Yes, so actually that's the other important element, right? Which is not so much inequality, but perceived inequality, all right? So there's another interesting study, which might sound a little bit like you must say, but of course. But there's an interesting study that goes around asking different people in different countries whether they're satisfied with their lifestyle. Well, guess what? People in poorer countries are less satisfied with their lifestyle. And I say this, although it sounds stupid to say it, because a lot of people, you know, we travel rather superficially. And people travel to poor countries and they see people smiling and they're like, oh, but they're so happy, they smile. It's amazing how much you learn from the poor because they're happy with so little. Oh, wow, let me take a few pictures with this African kid and post it on my Instagram. You should never do that, by the way. It's rather insulting. But you know, people travel rather superficially. And I do think there's a lot to learn from people who can live with less. That does not mean that they're satisfied with their lifestyle. The fact that they smile just means that they're way more resilient than we are. And even though they're not satisfied, they find a way to be happy in that context, right? So first lie, you know, poor people are not happy to be poor. Poor people would like to have your same lifestyle. The other thing is with inequality. Since the Industrial Revolution, inequality, not so much in the last few years. So when people say inequality has gone super high in the last, and I can compare what you have and your lifestyle with mine. So although my lifestyle might be better than that of my parents, and inequality as measured by Gini indexes might not be going up as high, my perception of how I could be doing versus how I'm doing, you know, there's a breach there. And inequality, is there? Okay, you tell me if it's something I should pay attention to. So the interesting thing about that is it brings a lot of volatility. This perception brings a lot of volatility. So when a lot of people say, but inequality is not a problem because look, in numbers it's not growing, like, well, but people don't live off numbers. People don't make decisions based on numbers. People decide based on perceptions. And if they think that they're not doing well, they're going to behave like they're not doing well. So there's a lot of conversation now about how companies can, should, and would want to get involved in these things. So for example, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation has been collaborating for years now with CocaCola. This foundation is focused on health. What could a foundation that works to make healthcare accessible in Africa, especially around some specific illnesses like malaria, for example, why would they be interested in learning from Coca-Cola? What is Coca-Cola the very, very best at, or one of the best at, that could be so helpful to fight malaria? They're very good at marketing, but it's not marketing that I'm looking for.
Understanding the needs of their clients.
That will be connected to marketing, but it's not what I'm looking for. If you've traveled in Asia or Africa or Latin America and you've gone to remote villages, you cannot find a bed net. But what can you find? A Coca-Cola.
That's branding.
They have an amazing logistics and distribution system. An amazing distribution system. So if you can learn or use Coca-Cola's distribution system to distribute bed nets, you could get bed nets to virtually every place in the world where there's a human being willing to buy a Coca-Cola, which today is virtually everywhere.
You're saying clean margin.
Exactly.
And so it would not be
Yes.
a humongous project
No.
to sell or to provide.
Yes. So they've been working together and trying to learn. But this is just one example of how competencies of the private sector, of corporations, can be so incredibly relevant in supporting the 2030 agenda and promoting achieving the 2030 agenda. As you might be aware, operations and logistics is today one of the most technology-intensive sectors ever. Distribution and logistics has become extremely efficient thanks to technology. And that technology has been developed by companies who are hoping to place a CocaCola very far away in the bush in Africa in the cheapest way possible so that they can take the biggest margin possible. But once that has been created, it can be used for many, many other things. Here's another example from a company called Intercorp in Peru. Intercorp is one of the biggest holdings in Peru. Intercorp owns Interbank. It owns several retail consumer goods companies. It owns hotels. It's a massive company. It owns schools. But when you go on the website, you don't see how much money they're making. You don't see how big they are. You don't see. This is the first thing you see. We make of Peru the best place in the world to have a family. They have realized that middle-class families in Peru are their main customer. And they have also realized that Peru as a country is important for them because they're proud of their country, because they love their country, and because it is a country where their company needs to thrive. So they have become what is called a purpose-driven corporation. A corporation that is working hard to align their business with their purpose, with their values, because it makes sense for them as human beings and because it makes sense for the business in the medium term. The problem for business when there's a challenge to the middle classes is that it's double-fold. On the one hand, the middle classes are the clients of most products. And if you're B2C, you need them to buy your products. But if you're B2B, you very much need them to buy the products of your clients, or else you don't have a client either. So that's one problem. The other problem is that middle classes politically tend to be more stable. So they tend to keep the country more stable. The moment they are challenged, it is more likely that populist movements and political instability and volatility will emerge. It's not a case by case and one by one, but more or less you can see that countries where the middle classes are perceived that they can thrive tend to be a little bit more stable. And the moment middle classes become fearful, it becomes a little bit more stable. And instability is bad for business, because you need to go, you need to get money in the international markets, country risk is higher, you don't want that. So in general, it is a good idea for business to grow middle classes. And you want to grow middle classes, not necessarily by making the richer poorer, but by making the poorer richer. And by holding those that are in the middle class still, protecting them from falling back into poverty, right? So this is the president of Intercorp in a video explaining this concept, right, of the Innova schools, the schools that they have created. Let me see if I can play this.
Uno puede vivir en un país en el cual tienes al 5% de la población que tiene acceso a una educación de calidad y el resto no. Tuve que viajar a las escuelas rurales en el Perú. No tenían los servicios mínimos básicos. Y me convencí de que este país no es sostenible en el largo plazo si no se hace algo radical en el tema educativo.
We realized that this country has been growing for the last 25 years at incredible rates, about 5%, and we're making tremendous progress. But then we also realized that if you look at just basic measurements of how education is moving forward, we've been dead last in the PISA ranking for the same period. Obviously,
Designing a new education system. Part of the brief was to make sure that these schools would be international quality, that they would be affordable for the emerging middle class, and that they would be scalable to disrupt the country's education system. Part of our design process was to make sure that we understood the people that we were designing for so that we could design a model that was right for them. What we learned was that students really wish to have their imaginations engaged.
From the design of the building to the use of how the curriculum is structured, to how the students interact during the day, they rethought everything from the ground up.
Todo colegio tradicional, el profesor llega a clases, te dicta y tú copias. Acá no. Acá el profesor llega a clases, te explica más a fondo y aprende.
Over the past 6 years, Innova has grown to 41 schools, serving 33,000 students. They're on track to have 70 schools by 2020. Student academic performance has been impressive. In reading, national measures have shown that 88% of Innova students are on grade level, compared to 61% in other private schools. In math, 61% are on grade level versus the national average of 25%.
Innova Schools is pretty special right now, but 5 years out, I think it'll be even better. As anything that you start from scratch, you learn things, you improve them, and you improve them, and you improve them. And I think that's what's going on right now.
You're going to have many other people hopefully replicate the model of Innova. So Innova's impact won't just be the direct impact on its own students, but on the meta-level impact on students everywhere.
I envision a few years from now, Innova, let's say in a country like Colombia or in Ecuador, and some.
So this is the work they're doing. And these Innova schools, by the way, the comparison, if you have not noticed, was with other private schools, all right? They're way superior to the average of other private schools, not public schools. Private schools that are charging 10 times more than what Innova is charging. So Innova does charge, but it charges in the lower band of what private schools charge to be accessible to the middle classes and gives results that are way better. And they are accompanying the portfolio of Intercorp. And their goal is to make money also of Innova, as they're contributing to the development of their country, right? So this profits and purpose for business is quite a movement. Many corporations are joining this movement and wanting to think differently about how they're making their money, not only about what they do with the money they make. And when you think about it, isn't this wrong? Is this the role of a company? Should a company care? You know, Milton Friedman very popularly said 50 years ago, the only responsibility of a company is to increase profits. What a lot of people don't quote is that he meant to increase profits within regulation and law and what's acceptable. So, you know, many years ago, having slaves was a reasonable way of making profits. And if someone said that today, that because companies should make profits, it's okay to have slaves, most of us would be scandalized. Societies change. So was Milton Friedman wrong or right, or would he be scandalized today if he saw, you know, all of these businessmen wanting to save the world? Anyone recognizes this quote? The invisible hand. If the butcher only focuses on his own interest, you know, he will, at the same time, together with every other businessman, actually create good for society. Who knows who this belongs to? I'm an economist, so he's famous for me. This guy is Adam Smith, the author of The Wealth of Nations. one of the most renowned economists in the world, one of the most important books in economy in the world. So actually do good for society. This other quote, how selfish soever man may be, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render the happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. What kind of profession might the author of this quote have? Maybe he's a mathematician, or what? What would the profession of someone who writes this be? A philosopher? Our good friend Adam Smith. In his other very important book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which we forget to read and quote when we comfortably quote The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was not an economist in the way in which we understand an economist today. Adam Smith was a theologist, a philosopher. And in his conception of the world, he understood human beings as needing to self-preserve and care for others, both at the same time. So can we build an economic system that is truer to this nature of ours? Can we build a social and economic system where we can take care of others and of our interests at the same time? Very much like in the other examples that I've been explaining, Intercorp Group is at the same time making a commitment to serve their country and protecting their interests in doing so. And if you say, oh, but they're only doing it to protect their interests, it's not true. They truly feel connected to the country. But they truly also need to self-preserve. Like, we all need to care for ourselves as we care for others. So companies and what it means to be a company and what it means to behave in one way or another or commit to one thing or another is changing. And social entrepreneurship exists precisely in this space. Social entrepreneurship is a framework of starting projects where there is innovation and a social mission and some sense of economic sustainability. The economic sustainability element really depends on the different authors. Some authors will say it needs to be profitable, and many authors will say it needs to be viable and just like sustain itself. It needs to be technically viable and it needs to exist, so it needs to sustain itself. And when you think about it from an entrepreneurship perspective, many times it just, it needs to exist within the company. And it needs to be, to some extent, consistent with the capabilities of the organization. So in social entrepreneurship, it is not only about what you do, but how you do it and why you're doing it. That really matters. And now I'm just going to give you a few examples, right? Malaria Spot, this is a social venture here in Spain. They use the concept of citizenship science. They've created a video game where, using the video game, you're diagnosing malaria. So it's been well researched, first in astronomy, that the opinion of a group of ignorant people in identifying that, that bright light there is a new star is just as accurate together as the opinion of one expert. And this also applies to illnesses that can be diagnosed with a visual diagnosis, with an image diagnosis. Malaria being such an instance. So the way in which you diagnose malaria is you take a blood sample, you put it under the lens, and you try to identify malaria parasites there. So what they're doing is they're turning these blood samples into video games for you to hunt malaria in your video game. And if enough of us playing over the same samples agree that this thing is malaria, it must be malaria. It's more sophisticated than that, but that's like the main concept. And they're very successfully applying it also to tuberculosis, and they're trying to expand it to other illnesses that are also mostly diagnosed via image. And they're doing very well. This is another example, Fabrilab. Fabrilab is a company in Latin America that does 3D printed customized limbs for children that have missed a limb. And it's really powerful, this idea of, first of all, 3D printing, like children grow. So investing in a very expensive limb doesn't make a lot of sense because all the time you need to buy. So poorer families just don't do it. And they don't buy the limb for a child because it's only going to last 6 months. I don't know if you have children, but my daughter, we need to buy all shoes new every 6 months. And it happens, like one day she has shoes, the next day she doesn't have any shoes that fit her. So if you're a poor family, just imagine having to do that investment with an expensive artificial limb every so often. You just can't. When you 3D print the limbs, and there's many, many, many projects about 3D printing limbs, it's cheaper, but what I also like about this project a lot is the psychology of the children when you customize it. That they really go from being ashamed of their missing limb to being like, hey, it's Real Madrid, it's a Real Madrid hand. What's with your hand? You have a normal hand. Mine is Wonder Woman. Like, so cool. So it's another use, of technology for social impact. Another example is a people protection app by It Will Be, again, a Spanish NGO. So they have created a blockchain-protected system to ID children in the streets so that they can be traced and tracked. And by improving the ID tracing and tracking of these children, they have reduced intervention time with children in the streets by half. I don't know if anybody has worked with homeless children before, but it takes a long time from the moment in which you find homeless children and you can take the homeless child to an orphanage. Because usually you will go to a train station, you find the children, you meet a child, and the child doesn't trust you, because in the same train station where you found the child is where sexual abusers go to rape the child at night, basically. So it's not like these children will meet a random stranger and they will go with you. It takes more or less 4 weeks. With this system, because they can track the child, every new social worker that encounters the same child doesn't need to start from zero. But they can read into the information that was already gathered by the previous social worker. So for example, if I'm a male social worker and I'm in the street and I meet a child and I track their palm and I get the information and I read that the previous social worker found out that this boy has been raped, I know that maybe I shouldn't continue the intervention and I might need to find a female co-worker to continue the intervention because she might have a better chance of having a connection with the child. Or the other way around, if I can know that his mother used to hit him and abuse him, maybe it's a guy that should be with him, or if there's a conversation that I can use. But this information could not be used in this way and exchanged in this way without the blockchain. Because just imagine if a child abuser had access to this information. So by using the blockchain in a protected database, it is that they have been able to create this system. And this hardware and palm mapping system, because biometrics with children are tricky, because they change a lot. So fingerprints, face recognition doesn't work so well, but mapping the palm, they don't map the lines as if they were telling your future, but they actually map the veins under your skin. And that is very personal and doesn't change over life. This is promoted by a Spanish social entrepreneur called Arantxa, and she's doing, she and her team, they're doing amazing work. So what we're trying to do here is, really make things that people want. And that's also true in social interventions, in social innovation. This is a list of the top reasons why startups fail. And you can see, number one is there's no market need. Number one is you're creating something that no one is interested in using. But if you see many of the others, they're actually related. This is the same in social innovation. Just because someone is poor, they're not going to take anything that you give them just because it's free. Because their time is also valuable. They also have stuff to do, you know. They're very busy trying to make ends meet. So just like providing anything is not enough. And it also undermines their dignity. If I go to a supermarket, I can choose any shampoo that I want. So if I'm poorer, should I just take the shampoo that you're giving me? Can I not choose? You know, the fact that I'm poor doesn't mean that I have not decided to, I don't know, have my hair shinier or fight dandruff. I also have an opinion about what my hair needs. It's the same for many, many, many services. You have a plethora of, I don't know, mortgages from which to choose. Now, why can't a poor person choose a mortgage? Why can't a poor person make a decision? So they make decisions. They vote with their shoes. They just do not participate in stuff, even if it's free, that they're not interested in. And then the organizers are like, they don't understand the value. Well, maybe you don't understand how valuable their time is, and you're creating something that is not valuable. So I'm going to invite you, as you think about projects for the awards, for the Everis Awards, to think about projects from a human-centered perspective. Thinking about technology, definitely, but not thinking about technology for the sexiness of the thing, but thinking about how cool the value that can be created is, and thinking first about the value for the person or for the environment, and then reverse engineer your value chain to understand what elements of your value chain can be technology intensive and what elements of your value chain cannot be technology intensive. And think about technology from a human-centered perspective and not from a technology-centered perspective. Technology matters as means to ends. Technology in itself is nothing. It's just a piece of stuff on a table. It's just, thousands of lines of code. Can we do something meaningful with it? Can we do something that is meaningful, not in my opinion, but for the value system and actual opinion of the person that I'm designing this for? So, if you have a user in mind, but maybe you still don't know, what it is that I would like to provide for this user, where do I start? The first thing is you want to do something that is desirable for the user. Because in the feasibility and viability, you can always work later. If this technology is too expensive, maybe I can find a technology that is similar enough and a little bit cheaper. If I thought I could do this and I can't do it perfectly well, maybe I can find a different way of doing something that is closer. But if you're doing something that they don't care for, rest assured, they won't use it. You will be putting your money to waste. And if they use it, they won't really be taking full advantage of it. You will always feel like you're pushing this into them. And also because you want to apply an efficiency criteria to these kinds of things. So you don't need to ask yourself, is what I'm doing good? Surely it's good, but it's what I'm doing the best thing that could be done with this time and effort and money? Or is there an even more impactful thing that I could be doing now with this time and effort and money? And just like in your regular jobs, you have efficiency criteria and return on investment criteria. And if you go to your boss and say, I have this software, it's good. He's not going to say, okay, let's implement it on a client. He's going to say, what the fuck? It's good. Like, good is just not enough. Is it the best that we can put together with the money that we have? Yes, okay, then let's implement it in a client. So it's the same. Is what I have in mind good? Not enough. Is what I have in mind the best I can possibly do with my talent and capacities? Is it the biggest impact that I can possibly can? Or could I do something that is more impactful? Because there's an opportunity cost to your time, to your effort, to your money, that you're doing also in helping others. There's an opportunity cost in solving the problems better. Not in you going to the movies with your partner, which you can, your significant other, which you can also do. But the main opportunity cost is, could I be having a bigger impact in the world by reconceptualizing this in a better way? And how to do it? Thinking about from an empathy perspective with the users or with those whose behavior we want to change. Empathy from a design perspective is not typically just putting yourself in the shoes of others. So it's not about imagining how I would feel in your situation. It is about knowing how you feel in your situation. Big difference. Big difference. Because how you feel in your situation is completely different from what I would feel in your situation. So this can't be done just by sitting at home and trying to connect and trying to imagine. There's tools, there's stuff, there's systems, there's processes, there's methodology. One very, very simple, powerful tool that you can use is interviews. So if you want to know how you would better cater to your user, you interview your user. An interview is not a survey. An interview is a long conversation where we get coffee and we spend time together. And it's a conversation where I'm trying to go below the surface to understand the real behaviors and the real insights explaining who you are and the real motivators of your situation and of your what it means. For example, what does it mean to be happy for you? What is relevant for you? What do you want to achieve? So some questions that you could start asking. Good questions and bad questions. Good questions are few questions, always about the past. These are my two favorite. Tell me the story of the last time that this happened to you. Walk me through when this happened to you. And then you shut up. And you don't speak for more than 10% of the time. And from then on, all you do is say, uh-huh, oh, how interesting. Could you elaborate more? Bad questions. Hypotheticals. If I created an app that did this and that, and I offered it to you, would you use it? Massive waste of time. You're about to be lied to, and it doesn't matter, like you truly deserve it. Whatever bad information you get and you use, or whatever happens to you from then on, all the ill decisions you're about to make, you deserve them all. Because you just made the worst decision ever. Human beings are horrible at predicting the future. Every night I go to bed promising myself that I will wake up 5 minutes earlier the next morning. And every morning I drink my coffee running while I put the coat on my daughter and trying to get my keys. If I can't predict the exact time at which I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning, how in the world will I be able to predict if I'm going to use a tool that doesn't even exist, I've never been exposed to, and I'm probably not even imagining correctly as you explained to me? There is no way. The only way to predict future behavior is project past behavior, which is why we ask, tell me about the last time you did this, walk me through the last time you did that. Walk me through the last time you downloaded a new app. Oh, I've never downloaded a new app. I just used the ones that were in my phone when I bought it. Well, that's someone who's never going to download your app. Because guess what? Yours is not going to be the first one they ever download. What do you use the apps that you have in the phone for? Oh, I chat with my friends. Have you ever booked a trip in an app? Walk me through the last time you booked a trip. Well, I went on the office computer, went on the internet, search engine. Do you have an app for that? No. Why? I only travel once a year. It would not make sense to occupy storage space with an app that I use once a year. I just go online. Well, guess what? She's not going to download your travel app. If I created an amazing travel app that is going to allow you to go around the world basically for free and rock your life, would you download it? Oh, well, maybe. I have such an amazing business in front of me. The other thing is observe. Just spend time with users and observe them in context. How do they behave? What do they do? Do they come? Do they go? Observe behavior as it happens. To gain this understanding of how they experience the life as it happens in their context. This is very important also from a business perspective, by the way. Not that it might have happened to any consultant here ever, but I hear that sometimes it happens to consultants that they recommend processes for companies that 2 months later are not in use. Why are they not in use? Because no one has spent any time understanding the way in which people actually work in the company, in the client company. And if you can't understand the way in which things actually work, not the way in which things should work in the client company, how in the world are you ever going to design a process that they will use? And then you're going to spend all the money that you weren't, that you had calculated for your margin, doing the training of the training of the training of the trainer, and managing complaints from the client. Surely this has never happened to an everis consultant, but I hear that in other places it does happen to some consultants. One way of organizing your work would be, for example, organizing some sort of rat table, right? If I want to work with, I want to support children with Down syndrome, or I want to change people's behavior so that they won't use plastic anymore. All right, so these are 3 things that I want to learn about, and this is my action plan. To learn this thing, I'm going to interview a few people, a few experts. To do this other thing, I'm going to do the experience myself. Let me do a walkthrough. A team of students of mine, they, in my last course, they wanted to create some sort of solution for people who want to do environmentally sustainable consumption. So they decided to undergo a green weekend, 100% green weekend. So they spent 1 weekend trying to only eat organic 0-kilometer food, using 0 plastic, like 100% all in. They came back on Monday, Professor, it's impossible. It is so difficult in Madrid. It's so expensive. Like people are like putting plastic in my mouth. Okay, I find it so difficult. And then you realize, see, people use plastic not because they're bad human beings, but because it's so difficult not to do it. Because it's so easy to use, because it's so prevalent in the environment. So if you don't understand that, how are you going to design something that will change their behavior so that they don't use plastic? If you do have an idea in mind already, how do you go about it? You might have heard about the Lean Startup. The Lean Startup and Agile methodologies are being used also in social innovation a lot. And it's about creating minimum viable products. A minimum viable product is the smallest experiment you can create to learn what is the most critical element that you need to learn in order to know whether your idea is what makes sense. A minimum viable product will never tell you whether you're going to be successful, but it should at least tell you that you're going to fail big time. It should at least give you the red flag, okay? So let me give you a social entrepreneurship example of how to use an MVP. Be Social Change is a community of social entrepreneurs in the United States. It was founded by a group of social entrepreneurs who felt lonely and had the intuition that there was value in creating some sort of social entrepreneurship association, and they could even maybe make it economically sustainable by charging for different activities, a little bit like a club or something like that. So if you have this idea and they wanted to create a website and they wanted to create a platform and they had all kinds of ideas of what to do. When I have this intuition, what would you say is my critical hypothesis? Of everything that I've mentioned, what is the one thing that if it doesn't hold, the rest is a waste of time? It doesn't matter what color is my logo, it doesn't matter what my brand is, it doesn't matter what kind of thing my platform runs on. What is the most important hypothesis on which the entire concept is built? Yes?
The amount of people that interchange.
Even before that, even before I start thinking how many people might participate, what is the one thing that if it doesn't hold, before that?
Well, the idea has to be a good idea.
But in this specific idea, In this specific idea, I'm going to create a platform to connect social entrepreneurs. What is my critical hypothesis?
That social entrepreneurs want to connect.
That social entrepreneurs want to connect. Beautiful. If social entrepreneurs don't care for connecting, I can have the best team. I can have gazillions of social entrepreneurs in the area. I can have the brightest platform ever. It won't go anywhere. So what they did was they went on Meetup. Meetup is a platform that already exists where people gather and go hiking together or whatever. And they created a Meetup in the region for social entrepreneurs. And they started tracking how many social entrepreneurs sign up. They started organizing events. Do they show up? Do they come? They started organizing different types of events. So do they come more often when it's a training event? Do they come more often when it's a keynote speaker event? And after gathering all of this learning, then they created the platform. Many times, again with my students, they tell me the first thing I need is to hire a developer. And I always tell them, and what are you going to tell your developer to code? The most difficult thing is not to code, it's to know what it is that needs to be coded. It's to know what it is that needs to be built. And then you can go build it. So if you have an idea in mind, I would invite you, in order to apply to the awards, just create a little experiment. A little, it's also part of the criteria, right? That the concept, the more validated that it is, the better. So if you can at least prove, I've interviewed 10 potential users, and this is what I heard from the users, and I can explain how my idea is built on the stories of my users. And I have created a little experiment that is still not over real code, it's still not expensive, it's still not full-blown, but I've created this little experiment that seems to point me at the right direction, right? That is going to give you a bigger chance of actually landing the award than if you just submit, a beautiful text talking about everything that you are going to do. You would tend to be more successful in awards with investors and all of these kinds of situations when we can talk about what we have done and then project that into the future than if we can only talk about what we are going to do and then it mostly sounds as wishful thinking, right? So if you have a project already, great. If you're conceptualizing one, you try to move quickly. And if you have a project already and you can reinforce your proposal by using interviews and quotes with users so that you can prove that the project is consistent and is actually having an impact and showing KPIs from the actual project or from experiments, that I think will put you in a better place. And the award is a trip to Japan. If you've never been to Japan, beautiful, beautiful country. Beautiful country. So regardless of the curiosity of the business element and meeting the entity people, just like going to the place is just such an experience. I don't know, we have a little bit of time for questions.
Really, so interesting words.
I am the only thing standing between you and the food, so let's wrap it up here and we can have a conversation over food. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.